but then they start rising exponentially, where it gets to a point where if you're a 100-year-old, you only have a 50% chance of reaching your next birthday. So the reason for that exponential increase in mortality is because aging is associated with many different processes that eventually lead one to death. So if you are lucky enough to avoid something, let's say heart disease, chances are that in a few more years something else will get you. So it just shows the complexity of studying this as a biological process. It's probably as complex as studying development. Now, why is this important for society? Of course, the number of aged individuals over 65 is increasing dramatically. As you can see, it's going to get to about 80 million by 2050. So clearly, this is a very important process to study. Now, there's many different aging theories. I'm sure you're familiar with some of them. People now think that aging is caused not by just one factor, but a number of factors that include shortening of telomeres, oxidative stress, glycation, which is the reaction of sugars with macromolecules. For example, glucose, which is a sugar we have in the blood, will actually react with proteins and damage them over time. This differentiation is the idea that cells are programmed to do something during development, but that with time they lose the ability to follow that program. Then there's other theories: membrane dysfunction, impaired protein synthesis, and autoimmunity, and several others. I just gave you some of the more important ones. Now, in terms of when one studies aging, it's important to try to focus on a particular group of cells that you might think is critical for survival. And in our case, we have opted to study cells that are long-lived, such as neurons, cardiomyocytes, and skeletal muscle fibers. And that's because these cells are basically, they don't undergo renewal. So, once you lose them, there's not going to be a replacement. Whereas cell tissues, for example, such as your gut or your skin, they're constantly renewing. So, in a sense, even in aging, where you might have more damage, you still have the capacity to replace those cells. But that's not true for muscle cells, neurons, and cardiomyocytes in large. Loss of cells and subsequent tissue dysfunction also contributes to Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, muscle wasting, and heart failure. These are major age-related diseases, and they're related to these particular tissues. Now, probably the most popular aging theory remains the free radical theory of aging, which I have outlined, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. Free radicals, of course, are generated as a result of metabolism, mainly thought to be generated in the mitochondria. So what's shown here are proteins which are part of the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So this would be a mitochondrial membrane, and you've got these proteins here. They basically shuttle electrons between them, but in the process they can donate electrons to oxygen through a series of chemical reactions, making superoxide, which in turn can either react with molecules or be converted to hydrogen peroxide. So we have lots of enzymes that actually get rid of free radicals. But still, some of them probably escape and react with molecules such as DNA, eventually contributing to aging. This is from a cartoon that on a Scientific American article that Richard Weinrich wrote a few years ago. It just shows what people think is the impact of aging on mitochondria, which are the energy powerhouses of the cell. So young mitochondria produce a lot of ATP, which is used for energy, and a low level of free radicals. Mitochondria is unique because it has its own DNA. As time passes, of course, with aging, things tend to go bad almost always. And what really happens is that you start getting a lot of free radical damage and decreased ATP production. So the mitochondria basically start going bad. Now, just a little bit more on the theories of aging. So there's a lot of biochemical evidence that free radicals contribute to aging. But in terms of genetics, what we know is that mutations that actually make animals be smaller usually make them live longer. So these are Chico flies to the right here compared to normal flies. These are mice that have mutations in growth hormone binding protein. and these are yeast, which are small unicellular organisms, and this particular mutant, SCH9, is small. What these all have in common, these small animals, is that they live longer than the normal-sized animals. And that's a very active area of research right now. The idea is that hormones involved in growth, such as growth hormone, which actually controls IGF-1, which is an insulin growth factor hormone, somehow have an impact in aging. And it's well documented that body size relates in a negative way with longevity. So large dogs, for example, live shorter than small dogs.